Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Mashreq Sustainability Dialogues podcast, where we take a deeper dive into this massive acceleration towards sustainability that we're seeing across the region as well as the world. The topic that we are tackling today is how to harness fintech for a sustainable Middle East. We're joined here today, of course, with our host, Fernando Morillo, Senior Executive Vice President and Group Head of Retail Banking at Mashreq, and our three special guest speakers, Imane Adel, Executive Vice President of Strategy at Paymob, Samir Abdi, Partner at PwC Middle East, and Matthew Shanahan, Partner at Norton Rose Fulbright. Thank you all for joining the show today. We appreciate your time. Fernando, I just wanted to first kick off with you as our host. Obviously, this is a big topic. We have COP28 coming up. But just to get your overall opening comments from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Look, I think we all have ahead of us a mammoth task of making this world sustainable. More and more countries are committing to a net zero by 2050. The task is not done yet, but it is clear something that everyone eventually will have to abide by. And when we just take a look at the task ahead, the numbers are really impressive. If you think about the latest estimates are that around $3 to $4 trillion need to be spent to make this world sustainable. That's around 3 to 4% of the global GDP. So you can imagine that this is like 3 times the GDP of a mid-size or mid-large country in the world. That's the task ahead. In order to do that, everyone has to really contribute. And logically, if you are thinking about every year channeling into the economies $3 to $4 trillion, the financial systems must do not their bit, but a huge amount of that work. So banks, of course, have to be there with their balance sheets, but banks alone cannot really go over this mammoth task, as we said at the beginning. That's where fintechs play a significant role. Fintechs are agile. Fintechs have a lot of talent. Fintechs are able to come up with ideas, put them in the market really fast, both B2B and B2C. And I think we have ahead of us a good opportunity for collaboration between these two. There's been recently this week a global fintech summit here in the UAE. There's been a good gathering of the most important fintechs in the world. I think this is high time to get together and discuss and see how this collaboration can happen and how can we all add our bit to this, as I said, enormous task ahead.
Thank you very much. Imane, I just wanted to first bring you in. Of course, as we just heard from Fernando, it's a massive, mammoth task and challenge to tackle. And of course, in your capacity in terms of, let's say, developing and implementing innovative business models, I just would like to get your opening thoughts on the overall critical question that we're tackling.
Thank you for that. So I second what Fernando was saying. Like, we can only succeed in doing this mammoth task by collaboration and all coming together. But one thing that is really key for fintech specifically and all of us in the ecosystem to think about when developing new business plans is to evolve from the thinking of just being revenue generating to thinking about us, the ecosystem, and the generations ahead. So we can do well by doing good, still having great business, but thinking outside of the standard box of what a standard P&L is and looking at what is our impact as players in the ecosystem from a social aspect, from an environmental aspect, and seeing what are the areas that we can drive from within with our core skills and what are the areas of collaboration that we can have with banks, with other fintech players, with government players in each of the markets where we operate in. So it's just thinking beyond the self of the company, but what is the impact of every single transaction and every action that we take on that merchant or on the user of the transaction, but also on its environment.
And just touching on that collaboration aspect, of course, we had His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, who is the president designate for COP28, talking about partnerships, not polarization, is what's needed to push things forward. specifically in the Middle East, in the UAE, are you seeing that ecosystem for collaboration and partnerships develop? Do you think, from a UAE perspective, that they're leading in that space and things are coming together to allow for that to happen?
Absolutely. Like we have seen, like with the government, the fact that COP28 is organized in the UAE is a very big testament to the commitment of this country towards the more sustainable future. We see a lot of collaborative bodies within the country, like with the MENA Fintech Association creating a sustainable fintech alliance where we all come together, drive education and knowledge share with fintechs, educate them on what are the practices to follow. Plus all of the like single initiatives by all of the ecosystem players that we see, and we have here also with us on the call colleagues from the ecosystem that can share with us more examples. But absolutely.
Let me add to that, perhaps, if I may. There are two ways where the regulator can help on that. One is providing the framework for such collaboration and the framework for sustainability. Actually, Matthew, who's in the call, has very good papers, which I've read, that summarize how that framework is being developed by all the regulators in the UAE and specifically in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Our regulators are very active on that front, extremely active and very advanced and committed. And the other part is providing the infrastructure for that collaboration and the rules of the game for that collaboration. Again, this regulator is super proactive. Is one of the most advanced and one of the most ambitious in terms of developing open finance frameworks and for such collaboration to happen. But perhaps, Matthew, you want to add on top of that.
Yeah, Matthew, I'd like to also bring you in, just building off of that as well. As mentioned, you have experience in the regulation aspect, but of course, to get your overall opening comments on the topic, and if you can touch on that in a little bit more detail.
In UAE, we're a little behind the curve when it comes to sort of ESG type regulations, but we're catching up very fast. So in 2019, the UAE regulators established a sustainable finance working group. So that's all the regulators got together, and they're committing to implement standards for sustainable finance. And since then, most of the key developments have been in the ADGM and the DIFC, and very recently we've seen the ADGM actually create a new category of investment in environmental instruments, which is so now carbon credits can be actually traded as investments in the ADGM. And in fact, a new carbon credit exchange has recently been licensed and is due to go operational very soon. So people will be able to actually trade those voluntary carbon credits in due course. DIFC is also making good progress. They recently consulted on their proposals for actual regulations around sustainable finance. And we think, although the central bank and the securities regulator, ESCA, haven't yet published anything, we think it won't be too far behind. So from being in a position of in 2019, not a lot happening on the ground, we've seen a lot of progress in the last few years. And I think given COP28 is on in Dubai this year, I think we'll see a lot of announcements and developments prior to that date. So it's in terms of the regulatory landscape, it really is an interesting time in the UAE, and we're certainly leading the way in the GCC region.
Samir, as well, from your perspective, we'd just like to bring you in for your opening comments. Of course, dealing with that critical question of how to harness fintech to create this greater ecosystem for sustainability in the Middle East.
Thank you for that, and good to be here. So I think that the most important piece of what we're seeing in the market is a shift from collective pledges to collective action. And that's the difference between, I would say, 2019 to today. There's actually tangible action towards not just the regulatory landscape, but also by institutions and associations. And Imane mentioned the Middle East Venture Capital Association as an example. And we see plenty more of these initiatives taking place, which are actually going to harness action. And where I see the agility of fintechs, basically bridging the gap between where we are today to where we want to be. That is the key. Fintechs are agile entities. They move at a much faster pace, and given the right regulatory base and foundation, we can actually bridge that gap quite quickly with the right investment, of course. So there is a call to action. There is action on the ground. In fact, we've launched our Net Zero Future 50 initiative, which is basically understanding the 50 entities or fintechs that are going to establish the right frameworks, but also create the right products for sustainable finance, for environmental governance, for climate change initiatives. Carbon trading was one example that was quoted just now. Greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gas capture, carbon capture. These are all aspects that are really important. But let's separate the environmental from the sustainable finance piece as well, because there's an environmental and climate change aspect that's related to greenhouse gas emissions. Water scarcity is another aspect that we are seeing a lot of work on. And then there's the sustainability piece to it as well, because we're seeing financial inclusion is a big part of sustainability and sustainable finance going forward, whether that's bringing the unbanked retail customer into the financial framework of a country or an enterprise, or even SMEs, which are really the lifeblood of any economy, and bringing them into the financial inclusion framework. And that's creating sustainable finance right there. And then when we go to the enterprise or the larger government-related entity level, you have green finance frameworks and sustainable finance frameworks being brought in, which are only going to accelerate the use of green finance and the access to green finance that we already see. So we're on the right track, and I agree with my fellow speakers. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of investment that's still required. We are definitely on the right track. There's definitely an acceleration that we have seen as PwC in the marketplace over the last, I'd say, 24 months. With COP28 around the corner, we only see that those initiatives being accelerated even quicker.
Imane, I just wanted to bring you back into that, touching on that point in terms of financial inclusion and inclusion in general. Can you speak a little bit more about that aspect, of course, coming from an innovative company like Paymob, what your experience is, and of course, educating on this aspect of where fintech and sustainability align and how fintech can be a main pillar for accelerating climate action and the way forward.
No, absolutely. So from the financial inclusion angle, I think this is the heart of everything related to SMEs, as just Samir mentioned. And at Paymob, this is the core of our DNA. Like, we serve SMEs, and what we have been working on, and we've seen it firsthand, is the impact of bringing digitization to underserved governorates in large countries. Whether they're developed or not, the needs are the same when a group of people do not have access to standard financial instruments. So one thing that is really key and essential is to think about the most basic needs that any person would need in a society from a financial perspective, and help bridge that gap and bring it to them. And from that aspect, the collaboration between a paytech or a fintech and a bank becomes critical, because this is where we join forces together to bring the long tail along with the bank, because in general, banks do not have the bandwidth to go to the smaller players. So we would work together jointly to bring a very large portion of the population into to be financially included, to give them access to payments, to help them grow whichever small business that they have, and slowly help them thrive in their environment. So this is a really key aspect. Not only does it come with the payment instruments and the technology and infrastructure that is provided, but it also comes with tools to help them build their financial acumen in the day-to-day perspective, help them understand how to better manage budgets, how to split their spend in such a way that would help their business and their daily life be more sustainable and easier over the long term. So that's one angle from a financial inclusion perspective. The other angle, when we look at it from a climate perspective, when it comes to digital payments in general, not just providing the service to merchants or looking at the consumer angle. But in general, digitizing a transaction, assuming I go online and purchase a product, I did not go in a car or in public transportation to go to the shop and buy it. So that's reduced carbon footprint in acquiring that product. There is also a much lesser impact from a carbon perspective when it comes to how much the new technology of payments actually takes up compared to traditional payment services, it being cash or even traditional banking, when you compare it to proof of stake type of blockchain solutions that are a lot more environmentally friendly. So there's quite a lot that can be done from that aspect by having the right conscious investment in the right technology to enable financial inclusion, but at the same time, it being as having as little impact as possible from a carbon perspective. And we're in a really good time now with all of the developments and innovations that are happening in our space to be able to accelerate that and really help us exponentially grow towards the targets that we have.
And if I may just add
Sure.
to Imane's point, I mean, the great point on use of digital payments that was brought up, we're seeing not just blockchain being used for the payments piece and in fact for authentication purposes as well, but we're also seeing now the same technology that was employed by fintechs for payments on the blockchain actually being used to help banks and companies with their Scope 2 and Scope 3 issues that are coming out from a climate perspective. And that's incredible because now we can actually map the entire supply chain of a particular borrower for a particular bank. And this is going to create a whole new ecosystem as well, a whole new business environment as well. And it's within the ESG principles that have been set out. So this is something to watch out for.
Thanks, Samir. Fernando, I just also wanted to bring you in on that as well. We talked about financial inclusion. Of course, Imane touched on the role of banks. Can you just dive a little bit deeper into that in terms of how banks can partner with complementary industries like fintech providers from your perspective?
Sure, I can. And in fact, I think Mashreq is notorious for that. So we've been working for 5 years now, creating specific value propositions for financial inclusion, like Neo for individuals and NeoBiz for SMEs, right? And it's all about collaboration with fintechs. Of course, it's all about your own capacity to develop things in an agile way. So banks also have to become fintechs themselves. Otherwise, this wouldn't work. But yes, we are onboarding several hundreds of thousands of clients, many of them new citizens, every year in the UAE. So, and we're learning a lot from that. And frankly, if over time, with all the learnings being incorporated and reach some critical scale, it's a win-win. It becomes also a profitable business. So that's the first direct thing that banks should place the focus on. And certainly we're exporting that knowledge to other countries. Now we're expanding these propositions to markets that need a lot of financial inclusion support, like Egypt and Pakistan, where we recently got a digital banking license. So the first direct thing for banks is to get themselves hands and feet, okay, everything on board into the provision of services to financial inclusion type of clients.
Matthew, I just wanted to bring you back in as well. We're talking about critical scale. Of course, regulations play a part of that, but also in terms of standards. I think across this massive acceleration towards sustainability, the blueprint for standards are still kind of being defined at the moment. What is your perspective on that aspect, and what do you think are the next steps forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are at a point now where the UAE and the regional fintech industry is really starting to take off. In some areas, they're leading the way. If I gave an example earlier, this new regulated carbon exchange in the ADGM, it's actually the first regulated carbon exchange in the world. So, but overall, the industry taken as a whole, it's growing. In relative terms, it's in its early days. what we need are standards which are obviously ESG based, but which don't stifle the industry. And I think the best way of achieving that, at least in this first phase of regulating fintechs and the finance industry generally in the UAE, is to sort of adopt a comply or explain model, because not everyone can meet the high standards, from the start. Having said that, whilst I think there should be proportionate and fairly flexible standards that are implemented at first, I do think the fintech industry is actually very well placed to achieve the sort of higher sustainability standards that the more traditional financial institutions may struggle with. It's in part because, fintech tends to attract Gen Z and millennials, and those types of customers, they demand more sustainable products. They're also smaller generally. I mean, a fintech that can serve 1 million customers is going to be smaller resource-wise than a bank servicing the same number of customers. And that makes having a sort of green supply chain much, much easier, because they've got this benefits of scale and this much more efficient approach. And they're smaller. They don't have branches. So I think in many respects, fintech could well lead the way in this space. But again, I still think what we need are two things. One is proportionate standards, but also some degree of regulatory collaboration at the GCC level, so that there's a sort of common standard, and that companies can cross borders with as much ease as possible.
Samir, I just see you're nodding your head as well. If you'd like to comment as well in terms of next steps for creating those standards, and also metrics as another aspect. We mentioned ESG, which is very hard to measure too in terms of impact there. What are your thoughts from that perspective?
Absolutely. I think Matthew's point on creating a level playing field in terms of standards across the region, at least, absolutely, completely agree with that. We talk of fintechs, and the first phrase we think about is scaling up. And to scale up in its truest form, a fintech needs a sort of level playing field across markets. We have to remember that Gen Z and most fintechs today, don't believe in national borders. They are, by their very nature, a cross-border enterprise. So standardization will go a long way in that. The other aspect which requires standardization is the use of ESG ratings. So the thing that we have seen more of is a focus on ESG ratings. It started off and has taken hold really with the investment management community, simply because of the flow of funds, and we see that with fintechs in the region providing rating standards and ESG ratings to companies on the listed exchanges, of course. Those have not necessarily yet permeated to the unlisted companies in the region. I believe it's a matter of time where that happens. And that's an area that will require an immense amount of standardization, because that is where we want to attract foreign direct investment and investment flows. We also want to attract impact investment flows into the same part. So to me, standardization will play a massive role, and standardization of how metrics are created, measured, and reported will become a very important area to work with.
Imane, I wanted to also bring you back in. We were mentioning Generation Z, millennials. From your perspective, and I think what sometimes is a main pillar of this aspect too is developing human capital. What do you think are the next steps that are needed within this ecosystem to develop that human capital, to attract the younger generation? What do you see as working and kind of the way forward? Because I think this is not just fintech, but also it crosses over into multiple industries.
Absolutely. Like one thing that is really different about the new generation coming into the workforce is that they do not take things at face value, like in terms of narratives and such. So we really need to walk the walk, and we really need to show that all of the pledges that we're putting out or the actions that we're committing to are being reflected across the company, across the leadership, across our entire communication, and they see that in the values of the people that they meet. So I truly believe that from a human capital aspect, we need to embody the entire sustainability narrative to be second nature to us, and that would directly create that level of credibility and buy-in that we're looking for in attracting the right talent in this aspect.
In terms of developing that talent, I think one of, again, across all sectors, a major kind of risk for the entire year is developing talent to accelerate sustainability and attack these climate change challenges. What do you think are the next steps as well in that perspective? Is it closer partnerships with academia, inter-industry collaboration? How do you think we can help attract but also develop that talent for the future?
Absolutely. Like we're in a chicken and egg type of situation at this stage in the development of ESG as a whole. And we see initiatives like the Sustainable Fintech Alliance, for example, that is bringing together banks, schemes, fintechs, and academia, as you rightly mentioned, to create programs to educate the companies that are either a part of the alliance or any other players in at least in the fintech ecosystem that want to join in, to educate the existing staff and to help shift the mindset to start thinking with the right frameworks and the right ESG principles and such, to really like understanding internally. And once all of that is developed from an internal perspective, then we can also work with academia to start incorporating sustainability studies within bachelor degrees, or have separate programs, or even have it from a very scalable perspective in education platforms that are accessible online to everybody. So just creating the right easily digestible content for different audiences to help bring everyone on the same page.
Matthew, in terms of easy digestible content, obviously with regulations and everything, what do you think can be done better in terms of communication in this space around regulatory aspects and those standards? I think that if we look at stakeholders across the region, some are starting at the beginning of their journey to the end and understanding major principles around sustainability. How do you think communication can be improved to help accelerate things?
I think on the whole, communication certainly between the regulators and stakeholders has been generally quite good, particularly in the DIFC and the ADGM. But I think on the whole, the one thing that would make a big difference, certainly with the what I call the onshore regulators, is for them to engage more in public consultation. It's not, in this region, and with a few exceptions, public consultation is not done routinely. And I think the best thing about public consultation and sort of asking for feedback from stakeholders is that you're going to get a really big range of the types of responders, and you're going to get a much wider range of views on things. And I think that will help to sort of develop frameworks and standards which align with the industry. And we saw recently, not on sustainability, but on just on regulation generally, in Dubai with this new crypto regulator VARA, they actually worked and held workshops with the licensees in order to help develop their regulations. I think that set a really, really good example for how regulators can develop policies and eventually rules. And by the way, their new rule book includes a section which it requires ESG reporting from VARA, from those who are in the VARA ecosystem, which is great. It's the first, it's certainly first in the country. So yeah, I think a lot more stakeholder sort of consultation, and then maybe some new ways of developing policy and rules would be welcomed.
And of course, Samir, coming from PwC, engaging with public sector, private sector, essentially all stakeholders in that space, in that ecosystem. What are your thoughts as well in terms of best opportunities to enhance that communication enhance that partnership, and of course, that will lead to actionable policy.
Yeah, I think it's both top down and bottom up. I think from a grassroots level, it starts with education generally. We conducted a survey not so long ago across the region, and we found that basically almost 60% of college students were reporting that they were short on skills when it came to understanding ESG and sustainability and sustainable finance. Fortunately, the UAE respondents were actually far better in that scale. They were only about 40%, so that was the case. So there's clearly work being done at a grassroots level at universities and colleges in the UAE to upskill the future workforce that understands how to work in a sustainable environment and an ESG-led environment. And then the top down, I would say. I wouldn't leave it to regulation. Regulation is a hygiene factor, if you will. It has to be there, right? That creates the level playing field. I think it's about investment. It requires the biggest institutions in the country from a private sector to take a lead and to say, here's the future and this is what we're part of. And that's what I'm really happy to see is the number of institutions that have declared their net zero ambitions and they're taking this forward. So I think it's both. And there will be a happy meeting of minds. I'd love to see some R&D grants coming out in this space going forward, not just for typical VC-style fintech investments, but more to do with fintechs that are related to sustainable finance. And maybe that's something for us to ponder for the future.
I think, as discussed earlier, 30 minutes goes by pretty quickly, but I just wanted to do one last round, of course, of closing comments. Imane, just to start with you, COP28 is coming up. Of course, you're seeing the build up to it based in Dubai. What are you looking for in terms of turning the dial for fintech at COP28? And what do you think are the opportunities there?
I think it's a fantastic opportunity to showcase all the great work that has been done so far and to really show the runway of everything that we are yet to work on by bringing different types of players into the entire ecosystem, not just from a payments perspective, but across the entire country. It would be a great opportunity as well to learn from other countries that would come in to visit, to share their experiences, their learnings, their failures, and for all of us to put our brains together and see how we can move this forward.
Thank you, Imane. And Matthew, as well, from your perspective, we're having two COPs back-to-back in the region. What are you looking at in terms of turning the dial?
Yeah, I think we all saw with the Dubai Expo that Dubai does things in a very grand way, and it doesn't it always overachieves. And I think what's going to be really important in terms of COP28 is one thing Dubai does extremely well is events. Everyone knows that we host the biggest, the best events, but really COP28 is about outcomes. And I think it'll be measured in terms of its success as to what sort of outcome, what sort of agreements are reached. And so I think that'll be a really important part of the focus. And I expect that to be the sort of direction that the Dubai government is pushing in other words, to achieve a sort of an outcome which is measurable, which means that the COP28 is a success and not just an event.
And Samir, as well, in terms of closing comments, as Matthew just mentioned, this COP is all about implementation, where we are at currently in terms of the Paris Agreement. What are your expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. As I started, we need to shift from pledges to action. I think COP28 is exactly about this. It's about shifting to action. More granular action is probably what we would all be hoping for. Initiatives that come out that have a 30, 60, 90-day cycle and then beyond, as opposed to longer term initiatives that may fall by the wayside. So really looking forward to this. I think it's going to be an amazing event.
And Fernando, I'd like to hand it back to you as our host today to give your final comments and your perspective for the outlook ahead.
Yeah, I think I really subscribe all that my fellow speakers have said here. I think all in all, and that's my personal hope, what I would expect to happen is the creation of an effective market of sustainability in the world. And that should be the real outcome of all this. I think we are developing pieces and bits of it, but it's not enough. So we need to create, let me step back. Take the Fintech as an example. Fintech is a success. Over $500 billion have been poured down onto Fintech. And it's not because someone has tried to do it. They are filling a gap. The 400 billion valuation of the global Fintech world right now, it's 60% payments, 20% blockchain crypto, 20% banking. There's not been any regulation at all. There's been a market. Okay. When you look into why this happened, they were filling gaps. Payments went there to create a common standard across the globe. Same did crypto and same did blockchain in one way or another, right? The reality is that that problem was simpler to solve because the market was there just to be grabbed. In the case of sustainability, we cannot see as a humanity, we are only now starting to see the benefit because it's too much in the long run. So the whole market, the pull and push, the demand and the supply dynamics have to be created. So there's three things. One is we all need to learn more. I think there's been a huge progress in people being conscious of the effect of climate change. There has to be clear targets on knowledge on that, and Fintech can help fill the gap. And we all have data, the payments companies, banks, we all have data that is really important at the individual level to see our carbon footprint so that we can take action on that. We just need to create a market on that front. Second, we need to, as we said, there's $4 trillion to be spent and channeled every year. We need to create a push and pull. We need the regulators, yes, and governments to commit. It has to come top down inevitably. On that front, there has to be specific targets to channel all that money. Banks are very heavy on balance sheets. We just need to find ways to put them into the right channel. That's not a simple task. We need to create a market where someone in the middle provides with the information that makes sure that something is really green investment, something is really a green loan. Fintechs have a phenomenal space there, but there has to be a market for them. There has to be money at stake for them to be made. And then they can be fantastic collaborators and intermediaries in that regard. And finally, it's about people, and people have to be pushy, and they have to create real reputational risk on corporations. So corporations are forced to get to these commitments. And finally, the regulator has to provide this leveling play field and common standards to allow for those fintechs to go global. Because right now, all that is fragmented. What we have seen in the fintech space, we are not experiencing or witnessing it right now in the sustainable fintech space. So we need, it's a complex mechanism. We need all the components of a true market to be effective and be in place. I know it's a lot of stuff to be asked, but the task, as I said at the beginning, is mammoth. And there's no better task on earth right now for ourselves and for our coming generations. So we really have to go for it.
I think that's a great way to end the podcast. Of course, the task is mammoth, but I think those in the room right now are willing to take that task head on and continue to pave the pathway forward. But I just want to do again, thank you, Imane. Thank you, Matthew. And of course, thank you, Samir, for your insights and your time today. For those who are listening and watching, please feel free to follow them on social media as well for updates from their own innovative organizations. And of course, follow Mashreq on social media for where we'll be publishing this podcast and content harvested with insights from it. But thank you very much again, everyone. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to having you back again on this series at a future date.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.